one of her major triumphs, and that's speaking of the her is Joy or Hulga, one of her major triumphs was that her mother had not been able to turn her dust into joy. But the number one was that she had been able to turn it herself into Hulga. What does she mean by this? What is the writer telling us? Hulga is prideful about, by the way, humility, right? And she does not have that humility as a characteristic. She is prideful. And one of the great prides of her life was that, one of her major triumphs was that her mother had not been able to give her joy. What kind of messed up thinking is that? That your great triumph in life is that your mother wasn't able to make you a joyful person? But the most triumphal thing in her life, even beyond that her mother's failure, which she took, pleasure in, was her own ability to turn herself into Hulga, which she says was the ugliest name she could think of. It's based on a character in Latin mythology who basically the Vulcan, who is in fire and he's disfigured and he's ugly and he's mean, and she wants that name, a feminine version of that name. That's what she takes for herself. So Hulga is not only kind of an ugly sounding name, but the name itself is about an ugly person. And she takes pride, she calls it a triumph, that she has made herself into this ugly person. So what was Mrs. Hopewell trying to do from reading this? What is Mrs. Hopewell trying to do? She's trying to make her daughter happy, trying to make her joyful and a source of joy to others. And Joy, or Hulga's reaction was, I'm not only going to reject what you do, I'm going to go the opposite way as hard as I can. Which, by the way, is very much part of the human condition. All right. No, she said, looking forward. Oh, this is Hulga speaking again. And this is as she and Manly are now heading off for their little tryst. She's made it plain to him that she wants to go out and spend some time alone with him. And remember, he has presented himself as this God-fearing young man who's out there selling Bibles because he believes every home should have lots of Bibles. And that's his thing. Now, something that was a common fraud at the time was Bible sales. People would go out and literally steal Bibles by the caseload and then go around and try to sell them because good God-fearing people would feel sorry on somebody trying. It was hard to say no to a Bible, right? Another really big fraud was they would have a little printing kit, and this is horrible. They would actually take little stamps and they would just tap in a last name onto the Bible. And what they do is they would go to the obituaries. And by the way, this was a very common scam at the time. We didn't widely know about it until afterwards. They would go into the obituary, so they would find somebody who had just died, and then they would stamp that person's name onto a Bible and use a little gold ink put in there and make it all look nice, very professionally done. And they would show up at the house of where this person had recently died, and they say, here's the COD delivery for John Smith, and well, he just passed away. Oh, I'm so sorry, but this is a cash on delivery. He ordered this special Bible. See, it's got his name stamped in it. I might say, well, he wasn't even a believer. Well, maybe he had a transformation right at the end of his life because he ordered this beautiful Bible, which is, hand embossed and yours for only $29.50, which was, 50 times what it should have cost at that time. So that was a big scam that was going on. So this whole person of Manly was probably a reference to this, by this time, widely known scam. It was like considered to be the cheapest, scummiest kind of scam that you could run because it was preying on people's sorrow over losing a loved one and also preying on their goodness as Christians. Okay, so she says, walking fast, I don't even believe in God. At this, he stops and whistles. No, he exclaimed, as if he were too astonished to say anything else. Okay, so he is continuing all this, by the way, what he does right after this, he kisses her for the first time and real passionately. And now she has been thinking, I've got the perfect plan for getting back at my holier-than-thou mother, because I, the nihilist, and she calls herself a nihilist, atheist, I am going to take this young Bible salesman and I am going to seduce him. And that'll show her. And so that was her plan. That's what she'd already been planning to do. So then he kisses her, and her first thought is, wow, I'm even better at this than I thought, because I wasn't even trying yet. So now they go up, and he says, well, where can we go? And she says, well, there's the barn here has a loft, an upper level. So they go up there, and he's getting everything all going. He's kissing her passionately and doing all this stuff. Yeah, I mean, he's working at it, right? Then he asks her, do you really love me? And all along she's been resisting telling him that she loves him. And then eventually she says, well, yeah, probably not the way you mean, but yeah, sure, I love you. He says, well, if you love me, let me see the place where the prosthetic leg is joined, where the leg is joined onto your body. And she's like totally creeped out now, because this is really weird. This is really sick. Besides, she's very self-conscious of this. Who wouldn't be? A young woman in the 1930s or 20s walking around with a wooden leg. She's self-conscious about this wooden leg. And he's wanting to not just see it, but he wants to see how it attaches and all of this. Well, she doesn't want him to do it, but he talks her into it. He's forceful, and she's already caught up in this whole thing of, I'm trying to seduce him, to the point that she's not even sure if it's her seducing him or if he's seducing her, what exactly is going on. So finally, he takes it off of her and he pushed it away with his foot. Come on now, let's begin to have us a good time, he said coaxingly. And this is her response. These are her words. We ain't got to know one another good yet. Does that sound like the language, the verbal formation you expect from PhD? We ain't got to know one another good yet. She's rescinding, she's recessing, she's falling back into her childhood all of a sudden. She is so beside herself, so outside herself, that she can't even function well enough to put a decent sentence together. And she's saying this, and then she screams, give me my leg. But he pushes her down, he gets her, get away from her. Now this is how he explains what's going on. One time I got a woman's glass eye this way. And you needn't to think you'll catch me, because Pointer ain't my real name, ain't really my name. I use a different name at every house I call at and don't stay nowhere long. And I'll tell you another thing, Hulga, he said, using the name as if he didn't think much of it. You ain't so smart. I've been believing in nothing since I was born. So she had been filling him all full of the philosophy that she'd been trained on, and there are various points in there that she refers to specific philosophers who are nihilist philosophers, and she believes in nothing, and she's an atheist, and he says, you think you're so smart that you talked yourself into believing in nothing? I've been believing in nothing since before I was born. In other words, I was born believing in nothing. And that's the beauty of this story, comparing it to the previous one. In the previous story, Hemingway he's Hulga. The waiter is Hulga. He has convinced himself of nothingness. He is full of nothing. And in this case, the girl who has talked herself into being nothing is confronted with the fact that it doesn't really take a lot of academic training to become a believer in nothing. Mrs. Hopewell and Mrs. Freeman, who are in the back pasture digging up onions, saw him being Manley, emerge a little later from the woods and head across the meadow toward the highway. Why, that looks like that nice, dull young man that tried to sell me a Bible yesterday, Mrs. Hopewell said, squinting. He must have been selling them to the Negroes back in there. He was so simple, she said. But I guess the world would be better off if we were all that simple. Mrs. Freeman's gaze drove forward and just touched him before he disappeared under the hill. Then she returned her attention to the evil-smelling onion shoot she was lifting from the ground. Some can't be that simple, she said. I know I never could. What's going on there, what it really is about is these two women who are both, in a sense, priding themselves, especially Hopewell, priding themselves on their own simplicity, on not being overly sophisticated, but being good country folk, right? And they see this young man, and what do? They assume the best. Well, he must have been back there ministering to the people that live in the woods. He's such a nice, simple young man. I wish the world would be better if we were all simple like that. And Freeman says, I wish I could be that simple, but I know I can't be. That's the ending of the story. So what did we just actually see? The person they were looking at and talking so fondly of had actually done the most horrible and heinous thing to Hopewell's daughter. He took her leg. He took her leg and ran off with it. He took her glasses. He took her leg and previously he had taken some other girl's eye. That's just disgusting. He's a horrible person, and he's a total nihilist. Without ever having heard the word, he is the epitome. He says, I was born believing in nothing. That's the fascinating thing about this. So the first story talks about nihilism, but from the point of view of the nihilist. And the second story shows us how empty that point of view really is. And that's why I think these two stories play so beautifully off of one another.